Welcome to Bankruptcy, Through the Looking Glass, with Barry Levine.
Welcome to Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. Barry is a Massachusetts bankruptcy attorney with more than 4 decades of experience helping individuals and small business owners get through difficult financial situations with clarity and common sense. I'm your host, Evan Mack, and today we're talking about one of the biggest fears people have when they start considering bankruptcy, that's losing their home. If you own a house in Massachusetts and you're overwhelmed by debt, what actually happens if you file? Let's break it down. Barry Levine, sir, welcome back.
Hey, thank you. It's nice to be back here again. It's been a while.
Absolutely. Barely, this when it comes to, when people filing for bankruptcy, I'm sure they believe it automatically means they lose their home. Why do so many people believe that?
Because bankruptcy is riddled with misconceptions. Most people really don't know what goes on. They listen to a friend who heard from a friend who heard from another friend, and a lot of it isn't real. In Massachusetts, has one of the best homesteads available. So when you file a bankruptcy, you can protect up to $1 million worth of equity in a piece of real estate that's your primary residence, which, makes going through a bankruptcy, it's more a question of whether you can pay the mortgage as whether the trustee cares or not.
But in Massachusetts, what determines whether someone can keep their home in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, so to speak?
Even in a Chapter 7, it all comes down to the equity. I was just explaining to a new client this morning, when you go through a Chapter 7 with respect to your home, you generally show the trustee the appraised value of the house, however many mortgage statements you have that gives him a view of what the total mortgages are, and in Massachusetts, the homestead. Because let's say the house is worth $700,000, there's a $300,000 first mortgage on it, and there's $400,000 worth of equity on paper. The homestead protects that equity.
How does the Massachusetts homestead, exemption work? How much equity?
You just have to spend $35 and pay a recording fee, and that's about it. It's a lot of people in Massachusetts, they find the form themselves and record it themselves. It's not that. In fact, here the Registry of Deeds just happens to be downstairs, so when they get signed, we just walk them downstairs. But that's all you have to do. When we used to file cases in person, the example I would give about the homestead would be I could file your homestead on the way to the bankruptcy court, and you'd be able to take advantage of the homestead exemption as long as it was recorded before you filed bankruptcy.
How much equity can actually be protected, though?
Up to $1 million.
So if someone's behind on their mortgage but wants to keep the house, how does Chapter 13 change the situation?
Well, at Chapter 13, it really doesn't. Well, again, it could impact the distribution you make to your unsecured creditors to the extent that above and beyond the homestead, there's equity in the house. But the homestead really, it's just a matter of showing that the creditors are going to get next to nothing. It just shows the exemption. It doesn't really affect it one way or the other. Lots of Chapter 13s filed to stop foreclosures where people have mortgage arrears. And unfortunately, Homestead does nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. You need to pay the money. So, but it's the real question with respect to, especially in Massachusetts, we're dealing with a lot now is people who've owned real estate for a long time. The real estate is appreciated in value, and very often it has no mortgages on it. How far does that $1 million go? I have a few cases where we're dealing with the arguments about valuation for purposes of the homestead. Creditors think that the house is worth more than the $1 million exemption. Wishful thinking most often, but sometimes.
Does the value of the home matter more than the amount owed on the mortgage when you're analyzing whether someone can keep it or not?
Well, no, because what if you add the $1 million to what's owed on the house? So if you owe, like I represent a young couple that I think their mortgage, the house is worth 1.8 million, and their mortgage is 900,000. So it's under the $1 million. It's strictly it's numbers. It's all numbers.
Mm. So Barry, what happens if there's very little equity in the house? Does that make keeping it easier or harder?
It's all a question of whether you can make the mortgage payments. You're looking at two different issues. The issue is, does the Chapter 7 trustee have an issue with an issue? Think there's equity beyond the homestead. That's one issue. The other issue is, can you pay the $5,000 a month to keep the house? Sometimes that's easier said than done.
If a foreclosure sale has already been scheduled, is it possible to stop it by filing for bankruptcy?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what's called the automatic stay. You file a bankruptcy, and as they say, the stay is automatic. Theoretically, you wouldn't even have to let the mortgagee know, but it pays to be prudent, and that stops it in its tracks. There are certain limitations having to do with people who are multi-filers under Chapter 13. That if you file a Chapter 13 within a certain period of time, you have to ask the court's permission to extend the automatic stay. But Chapter 7, it's automatic.
Are there situations where filing for bankruptcy might actually put someone's house at risk when it wasn't before?
If you're making the mortgage payments, I don't see it. I mean, it all comes down to the numbers. You may have some, creditor thinking the thing is worth more than it is or something like that.
Right.
But as I've maybe said before, it is what it is. So, even if they think it's worth more, go appreciate that value. Go find it someplace.
And Barry, when someone owns, a home and is overwhelmed with debt, what should they look at first before deciding whether bankruptcy makes sense?
Well, I think, as like I said, explaining to a client this morning, you have to pay the mortgage, you have to put food on the table, you have to take care of the kids, gas in the car. The creditors, they're the least of your concerns, though people don't seem to realize that because they can be quite annoying. But there's not much they can do to you. Like I said, it's only money. And if you don't have any money, what are they going to get?
Thank you guys for tuning in to Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. If you want to learn more or connect directly with Barry, head to levineslaw.com. If this episode helped clarify things for you, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey through bankruptcy. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.